Cameron Cedar, and I'm a technology strategist. You may be coming to this demo because you saw a session that I did with Don Vosberg on deploying K3s to the edge with SUSE Manager. And this is a deeper look into how we were able to accomplish that and some of the details behind it. We'll go into how that's all configured and how that's all set up. So to begin, I'm going to take a look at my virtual machine manager. And this actually has a couple of hosts that are involved in this demonstration. I have Nook 1, which is, in this particular case, is being used as an edge platform. And I have that sitting in my in a rack in my closet. And then I also have this other server, which is called Beast. And it's basically a virtual machine host, and it's got the SUSE Manager server. It's got a Kubernetes cluster that's running Rancher on top of it. And I'm also running what's called a SLE build host for operating system images that can be built from that. And then I also have a couple other things that aren't part of this infrastructure. So I'll focus in on those two virtual machine hosts specifically for this demonstration. And to begin, looking at the SUSE Manager dashboard that you see in front of us, this interface that you see now is typically what you come to after you log into SUSE Manager. Now, this system has been already set up and already built, but it's got a couple of systems here. I've got a SLE build host that is used to create operating system images. We can drill down into that. And it's easily set up. You install a SLES system and you modify its properties and you select OS image build host. And it will go out there and set it up for a Kiwi build host so it can build operating system images. Going back to the overview of all the systems, I've also got this Nook 1, which is being used as a virtual machine host as well. Similar thing, I install SLES, go to the properties of the system, and it will set everything up so that it's a virtual machine host. And with that, I can actually manage the virtualization from SUSE Manager, which, it's not a full-blown virtualization platform, but it gives you everything that you need to launch virtual machines, start them, stop them, restart them, suspend them to disk, those types of things. So it's a very basic virtual machine management. It's not a full-blown virtual machine management, so you can't do any storage management and various other things. It just does the basics. And so this is actually pretty great when it comes to an edge platform use case, where you don't really need all the bells and whistles that maybe a VMware environment provides. You just need something simple that you can manage hosts at an edge location, and this gives you that. So in this demonstration, I'm going to create a virtual machine, and when creating this virtual machine, it will also go through a series of automated tasks. And these automated tasks will first register itself to the SUSE Manager server. And then once that is complete, it will go through a series of looking at the inventory of the virtual machine, checking to see what's actually installed on it, and making that available to the SUSE Manager system so it knows exactly what's on there. Once that's all complete, it will then go through another series of automation and actually create a new cluster on the Rancher server. And once the cluster is created, it will then register itself to the Rancher cluster that it created and join itself there. So you can actually manage Kubernetes there. So with that automation, it's creating a K3s Kubernetes cluster and then creating the Rancher cluster so that it can join itself to it. So let's go ahead and do that really quickly. So we'll go ahead and create a guest. And I'm going to just call it K3s1. We're going to give it some memory and give it some virtual CPUs. Now I've got this option here for source template image URL. Now this is the location where the SUSE Linux Enterprise build host will actually export the image that it creates. And I actually have that location here. It's a simple location that it puts out there on the SUSE Manager server. So I'm going to actually copy that image URL and go back to the SUSE Manager server and paste that in there. And this is just one of the images that we've created there. And I'll go into the details of how we do the creation of those images and whatnot. Moving on down, I'm going to give it a MAC address because I have this already set up for my DHCP and DNS in my environment. So I want to be able to give it a specific name when it boots up. So after that, I'm going to hit create, and this will get sent to the scheduler here in SUSE Manager. Now the scheduler runs on a periodic basis, runs every minute. And so depending on where you catch it in its time frame, it may take a minute to show up in the list here. We can actually go to the events tab, and of course now we have one pending event, creating a virtual machine. If we go to the history, we notice that it did get picked up, so we can look at virtualization now. And we can see that that operation is running. And so it should be picking up the image and then booting up that virtual machine. I can actually see the console directly from SUSE Manager by clicking on the console link there. And it's booting up, as you can see. So while it's doing that, it's going to start doing some operations. As soon as it gets to the login prompt, it will start all that automation that I was talking about. So it'll just take a moment to get there, and there we go. So I'm going to close that out. We don't want to look at that. So right now it's going through several different actions. We should see it in the system list right now, and we do see it there. There's our K3s1. And it's actually doing some events. We can look at again, going into the events tab of the system, we can watch to see what it's doing. And if you look at the history, it has several events that are kicking off. And it's going to get a hardware list, it's going to get a software listing, it's going to look at all the software channels, apply those to the system. And then it's going to run these salt high states. And the salt states here are all part of the automation, which I'll go through here in just a minute. But let me go ahead and refresh this. In this history, you can see that some of those items are now actually being checked off. So we should go back to the system list, and you can see it's still also green there. It should come up red because this is actually running an older image, and it should have patches and updates that need to be applied to the system. So this will just take a few minutes to actually go through these events. And through this high state, he's going to register himself to Rancher. You can see that it's going through that automation now. It's installed the K3s cluster. It created a cluster here in Rancher, and now it's actually registered itself to Rancher. And so we see this demo K3s cluster now showing up in the Rancher dashboard. So that's all fine and good. We can actually take a look at this cluster. We can see that it's actually a single node. It's a K3s cluster, as it shows for the provider. If we go to the global view, we know that it's one node here as well. we can actually go to the Explorer and we can look at that from a Kubernetes perspective, and we can launch new workloads on it and Helm charts, etc. So that's all fine and good, but what if I want to expand that to multiple nodes in that cluster? I can certainly do that with SUSE Manager as well. So going back to the system list, I've got K3s1, so that's the first node in the cluster. I want to be able to create a K3s agent, which would give me a second node for the cluster. So going back to the NUC1, which is our virtual machine host, and go into virtualization. I've got that one virtual machine running. Let's go ahead and create another one. And for this one, I'm going to call it K3s2. And again, we're going to give it some memory. We'll give it 4 gigabytes. We'll give it a couple of virtual machines, or a couple of vCPUs, excuse me. And we're going to give it a different image. And this image for the agent is very specific to an activation key. And I'll show you why we have to use these different activation keys when we instantiate a new image, because we're tying it in with a different set of salt states, different types of automation, and I'll show you that information after this is all complete. I'm going to give it a different MAC address because, again, it's being tied to a different host in my DHCP and DNS, and we'll go ahead and create that. So we now see K3s2. Again, we can watch him boot up through the console if you click on the console link. We're not going to go ahead and we're not going to watch that, completely. But as soon as it does get to that login prompt, again, it's going to go through that automation process. And we should start seeing that show up in the system list fairly soon here. Now we have K3s2. And so he's going through the automation now, grabbing the hardware information, the software information, like I said before, and then it's going to run that high state and do some automation. And we'll see this show up in the Rancher dashboard. Notice it's already picked it up. It's installed K3s already, and it's picked up 2 nodes. So that's already changed. So that was actually pretty quick. So we can take a look at this K3s cluster. We can go to our Cluster Explorer and launch workloads on this brand new cluster. So more importantly, we've also built in some other automation to that. So every new virtual machine that I'm actually launching here from SUSE Manager, I've actually tied in a Prometheus exporter so that those 2 systems can actually be monitored as well. And it's being tied into a system group called Edge Demo. And if I go to my Prometheus, or actually my Grafana dashboard, which is I'm actually running on the build host, I can look at this Edge Demo group and then look at all the hosts that are available there. It's not pulled in K3s2 yet, but I can see K3s1 is there, and I can drill down specifically on that single host, and you notice he's already gathering metrics. The CPU utilization, the system load, the memory, disk capacity, all that is available through the dashboard here. I can take a look at all the hosts for that Edge Demo group or individually. If I refresh the page, let's see if that K3s2 will show up. There it is. We now have K3s2 in there, so I can drill down to him. He's very new, so as you can see, the utilization, CPU usage, and whatnot, we don't have a very long historical view yet. But you can show that the mount points are there, that it's actually running K3s with containerd. So that's very nice to have as kind of a holistic view, just with automation. And just by a few clicks, we're able to get this all automated. So let's actually drill down, as after we've seen all this automation occur, let's drill down into seeing what all of this looks like underneath the covers. How are we able to actually accomplish this? So first of all, we used some virtual machine images that were actually created using the SUSE Manager server, using that SLE build host that I was talking about. Now, we've gone through the creation of that SLE build host already, but how do we actually use that? And if we look in our menu here on the left, and you can search for it as image as well, but if we go to images, we actually get our image list. And this image list shows I've only got 3 images. The nice thing about this is it will actually show that my images are out of date. They have patches that need to be applied. So if I wanted to actually create new systems with the latest patches and updates, I would need to rebuild that image. And using this interface, I could actually rebuild that image really quickly and easily. And if I go and click on this little action menu to the right and go to details, I can click that rebuild in the lower right corner. So I just click rebuild. That will rebuild the image with the latest patches and updates. If I really wanted to see what was available, I could click on the patches tab, and it will show me what's available there. Or packages, if I want a package view of what that looks like. So that's pretty straightforward. But what if I'm starting from scratch? If I'm starting from scratch, I want to be able to create a profile first. Now, a profile is actually pulling a Kiwi image profile. And if you're familiar with those, they're basically just a YAML formatted file that that gets pulled in. And if I go ahead and edit one of these, we'll do the top one. We'll take a look at where that's pointing at. We've got the target. This is actually where the image is going to be created and dumped on the SUSE Manager server. But this config URL line, this is actually being pulled from GitHub. So it is a specific location out there on GitHub. I've got a GitHub location there for OS images that you can pick up. And let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. And here is the XML file. Excuse me, I think I said YAML format. It's XML formatted. So this config is really what needs to be modified to create this image. So you may not be familiar with Kiwi. There are some other sessions here at SUSECON that talk about Kiwi and how you modify Kiwi images, how you modify the XML and all that. So you can dig into that in those sessions. So you pull that configuration file from your GitHub location, or it could be a local file or an HTTP URL that you have available somewhere on premise. And then you give it an activation key. You tell what activation key it's going to be using, which also gives it the type of software that will be applied with that activation key. And then any additional values you might want to pass into that virtual machine can also be applied here. And then, of course, you would update that. So that's the first thing that you would do is the creation of a profile. Once you have that profile built, then you can select the build option for the profile. and it will go ahead and start the build process of that image. And you might go through several different builds to get it exactly right or exactly how you want it. I think I went through maybe 8 separate builds to get that all completed for the K3s automation. And there's several different ways that you can do this. This is one approach. You could, in fact, embed K3s into the image if you wanted to do that as well, if you had an offline deployment. But we chose to do it using some salt states. So that's images. So moving on from images, let's take a look at that activation key that I was talking about. So if we go up to systems and then go to activation keys, I've got a couple of different activation keys that I've used here. I've got the K3s, and then I've got the K3s Agent. Let's first of all take a look at K3s. So this activation key was tied to that image that I was talking about. Now, being that it's actually tied to the image itself, this basically tells it what software it's going to get applied, the software channels that will get applied when that image comes up and is booting. It also will tell it that I want monitoring, so the Prometheus exporter will automatically get triggered for install when that image comes up. And so that's why we get the monitoring with Prometheus. And then we're going to deploy some configuration files as well. Another thing that you can do with activation keys is joining to a group. Now, in this case, I'm joining to the Edge demo group. So I can keep those systems in one location. If you're doing this for an Edge use case, maybe you have multiple Edge locations that you want to keep track of in a group. And so you can actually create different activation keys that get tied to different groups. And then this is where all the magic happens, and this is part of the configuration. If we look at the configuration tab, I've got a couple of things going on here. I'm subscribing myself to a couple of different configuration channels. Okay, I've got a configuration channel called Register Rancher, and I've got a configuration channel called Install K3s. And we can take a look at those individually. And if we want to navigate those directly from here, I could, or I can go into the menu on the left and navigate directly to configuration from there. So I could click on configuration and then take a look at the configuration channels that I have available here. So I've got one for install K3s, install K3s Agent, and then one called Register Rancher. This one called install K3s, this is used to, like it says, install K3s. It actually works off of a single salt state, this init.sls file. So if I take a look at that file within the SUSE Manager server, it's very basic. Okay, so first of all, I'm setting some variables, and I'm setting that variable through some salt pillar data. This pillar data is actually getting manually created on the SUSE Manager server. So I've created that data on the SUSE Manager server, and that's all explained through this documentation here, the salt pillar creation. And so running through this will help you understand how you create that specialized pillar data that's required for this. So going back to the SUSE Manager server, I'm using, I've got some pillar data called K3s token. So I have a token that's actually stored there. It's just a token that I created. The token really could be anything. If I look at the documentation, you can You can use this command to create the token if you want. Or in this case, I'm actually just using this token, K3s demo token with Suma. You can call it whatever you want. And so I'm setting a K3s token variable from this pillar data. And so I'm injecting that, as you can see, into these commands that I'm running here. So I'm actually doing the K3s curl command to go out and grab K3s, and then it runs a shell script specifying that I'm actually installing the server piece, and it's using that token that I specify. And then I run another script here that does a while loop, and it waits for the system to become ready. So I'm doing a kube control get nodes, and it's grepping for ready, making sure that those nodes are actually ready. Once it does that, it writes a file out to this temp directory called K3s ready. And then I've got another state in here that actually does a test for that file and executes a configuration file that gets loaded out there. It's a shell script called register rancher. So once K3s gets installed, then it runs this script that that registers and joins itself to the rancher cluster. And let's go ahead and look at that one. So if I look at my channels again, I've got this register rancher. This register rancher is just a file that gets, copied out there to that node. It's going to put itself out into user local bin and make itself executable. As you can see, the permissions there on that file are executable. But it's actually a simple script. It's all run in bash shell script. So it's going to create the imported cluster. It's just using curl in this demonstration, but it's using the token, and then it's registering itself to rancher again, using the cluster ID that it outputs here from that first command. And so it's using that cluster ID in the second command using the API. So these curl commands are actually making API calls here. And this particular token is an API token that's from the rancher cluster. Now, I'm sure there's better ways to do this, or there are other ways, and I'm sure there's other ways to customize this, especially hiding this token, of course. And if I spent some more time on it, I would certainly clean things up afterwards, after it was completed, just so that stuff isn't sitting on the server. I would go through and just delete it. And so you can actually do that as well, so that that token isn't sitting around on the server. And then once it's all registered, it touches a file saying rancher registered. It's just a file, a 0-byte file that's sitting out there. If I look at the other channels that are available, I also have the K3s Agent. The agent is a little more simplified, since it doesn't have to register itself to rancher cluster. If I look at that salt state init.sls file, it's just one command. In this example, I'm just doing a shell script execution that's doing the agent switch, and it's pointing to where the server is. Again, I'm pulling out some salt pillar data. I've got the K3s server, and then again the token. So it's going to pull out the same token, but it's pointing to where that the server is actually being located. So that's pretty simple. Again, this is all based on custom pillar data that we're creating here. So that's it for the configuration management side of the house. And so those are all the bits for, all the automation that's occurring here in this demonstration. On top of that, you've got, so we explained the image creation using the SLE build host. We've explained the configuration management, and then also the activation keys. We went through those. I do have a separate activation key for the K3s Agent, since that actually pulls in a different set of configuration channels. So that was a requirement there. And with that, actually had to create a separate image for the agent because it uses a different activation key. You have to have a different image in order to for it to utilize that activation key, because that component is actually embedded into the image. So both of these images have activation keys that are embedded into the image. Now, again, there might be another way to do that where it doesn't have to be embedded. This is just the route that we went for creating this as a virtual machine. You could also use images here to do like a Yomi installation on bare metal servers as well. So there's some flexibility and some options. So if you're doing an edge case that's on bare metal systems, maybe for some retail stores, or maybe it's for a medical use case, there's some options here. There's multiple options. I think up to this point, that is pretty much everything. Again, the documentation is out there, and you can go to view that on GitHub /SUSE/manager rancher auto. So that should be pretty easy to find, just Googling that. But this will walk you through the complete setup of SUSE Manager plus Rancher plus K3s or RKE automation. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll look forward to talking with you in the chat at SUSECON. Thanks again.